morning. Good morning. My name is Marlise Singh, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees here at Mainline Unitarian Church. Welcome to our service this morning. Welcome to all of you here and online. My daughter's watching. First, let me introduce our guest minister of today, Reverend Libby Smith. She was ordained in 1992 and has served as both a parish minister and a chaplain. Now that she's retired from congregational work, she sees her work as a part-time patchwork ministry of trying to say yes, made up mostly of guest preaching and rites of passage, and enjoys having more time for her husband, garden, and cat. She has enjoyed her connection to MLUC over the years. I am sure many of you know her, and is delighted to return. The other members of our worship team this morning are Chris Cavalieri, our worship associate, and our music director, Dr. Vincent Craig. A special welcome to those of you who are visitors here. Please join us for coffee and conversation after the service over in the fireside room. And please check out the welcome table in the lobby and our website, mluc.org, to find out more about us. We are Unitarian Universalists. We affirm religious freedom and celebrate diversity. Our religious community does not have a required creed, but instead we come together to support our search for meaning and purpose in life. We are trying to bring more compassion, justice, and responsible stewardship to the world. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your background is, you are welcome here. I have a few little announcements. Please remember to bring in your contributions to our backpack drive and school supplies collection no later than next Sunday, because then we'll be getting ready to stuff the backpacks. Also, we still need more volunteers who are able to provide rides for our new ride-sharing program. And if you need a ride, please make sure to send an email at least a week before that date. And now, Jim Ramsbottom has another announcement.
Thank you, Marlise, and good morning, everyone. Chris and Libby Smith, Reverend Libby Smith. Yeah, I wanted to just plug or promote our what will become our annual getaway Labor Day weekend. It's going to be Saturday, September 2nd. Saturday, September 2nd. It's Labor Day weekend, and this is going to be a getaway to Ridley Creek Park. We call it MLUC Day at Ridley. And for those of you who perhaps attended last year, which was the first time we had it, you will recall there were a number of different activities, events, etc., including, well, at a minimum, hiking. They have trails, the white trail, the red trail, the blue trail. And we're also going to be at a pavilion, which is pavilion number 8, which is adjacent to the horse farm. And the horse farm, totally within Ridley Creek Park, is under new ownership this year. So we're still getting some of the details, but the feature of the horse farm, other than to just walk through it, is pony rides for the children. So we're anticipating we're going to have, I've only been able to speak to not the principal, the new woman operator owner of the farm, but her husband. And he indicated to me that it looks quite good that we will be featuring pony rides that Saturday for the children. So something to consider. Otherwise, we're going to have a variety of games, ball games, volleyball, you name it. And of course, the centerpiece of the gathering at Pavilion number 8 will be, we'll have a big grilling operation underway, burgers, hot dogs, you name it, we're going to have it. And so we're looking to encourage everyone to come. It will be, you might say, the first gathering of our community in the new church year. And so mark your calendars, Saturday, September 2nd. And that's, I guess, what I have to say. Thank you so much.
Well, and maybe it's actually not going to be the first gathering of the community, because I think the first gathering of the community is going to be on August 20th, and I would like all of you to mark your calendars. That is the day when our new senior minister, Reverend John Morehouse, and his wife Frances will come here for his first official worship, August 20th. Please join us in welcoming them to our community with open hearts and loving hearts, and with lots of goodies that you contribute to the coffee hour. There's a sign-up online. The sign-up link was in the e-notes, and it's also on the website under latest news and events. So please all come. And at this time, take a moment, please, to silence your cell phones, and then we can state our mission statement together. Together, we transform lives through love, service, and our welcoming faith.
Good morning, everyone. As we light this chalice, we ask the breath of the universe, gentle and strong, to revive the flame of our resilient souls. Breathe life into desolate hearts, prisoners of pain and fear. Return to blow over the tumultuous waters of our history and provide direction. As morning light, remove the darkness from our eyes and inspire the mind of every human being. Help us to collaborate better in the construction of meaning on which we work together.
so many reasons I enjoy coming back to mainline Unitarian Church, and Dr. Craig, you are high on my list. Thank you. That was delightful. The words for our call to worship come from Krista Tavez. Whether you have come here with heart full or heart empty, with spirits high or low, rested or tired, hopeful or despairing, whether we have come here out of habit, conviction, loneliness, or curiosity, you belong here because you are here, and all that you have and all that you are is welcome here. This morning, we are, together, the heartbeat of this congregation. I invite you to rise in body or spirit, and we can sing together hymn number 300, With Heart and Mind. Then. Okay, is this better? I'm guessing that everyone in this room at some time or another has tried to learn something new, something you really didn't know much of anything about. And that's hard, right? To try to pick up something that you don't know about. So what do we often do in that situation? We look for someone who knows more about it than we do. We seek out a wise one, a teacher, someone who can help us understand. Well, in the Zen Buddhist tradition, the people who have been practicing Zen a long time and are thought to be very wise are known as Zen masters. And people will go to Zen masters with their questions when they want to explore and learn about Zen. Sometimes, though, a person might think they really already know quite a lot. Maybe they think they're pretty darn smart. They've had a lot of education, they've been to school, they know things. So when they go to the Zen master, they might not go with the kind of open mind that would be most helpful. The trouble is, they think it's going to be easy for them because they're so smart, right? But the trouble is that no matter how smart you are, Zen isn't easy. It's very complicated and it's full of puzzles and contradictions that make you think and experience in different ways. So all these teaching tales have been collected over the years about the ways that Zen masters have tried to sort of surprise their students into thinking a little bit differently. And this is one of those stories. It's about a Zen master named Nan-in and a university professor. Now, full disclosure, I am married to a university professor. I like university professors. I know lots of them. I admire and appreciate them. And sometimes they think they know an awful lot. And they do about many things, but not necessarily everything. So this is a story about Nan-in and the university professor, but I just remind you that it may be a professor in the story, but in real life it could be any one of us in that role, so bear that in mind as you listen. So I'm going to ask Chris to then hold the microphone while I'm actually telling the story, because I need both hands. So Nan-in was and this story was written down in the book Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. Nan-in, Japanese master during the Meiji era, received a university professor who came to inquire about Zen. Nan-in served tea. He poured his visitor's cup full, and then he went on pouring. The visitor watched until he couldn't stand it anymore and said, "The cup is too full. No more will go in." "Like this cup," Nan-in said, "you are so full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you empty your cup?" Words to live by. Thank you. And now I invite any children or youth who might be with us to head off for your morning programs as Dr. Craig plays for us.
Juggle up here. At MLUC, we donate half of our weekly offering to a worthy organization through our offertory outreach program. And the recipient of July and August of our offertory outreach is the Family Promise of Main Line, formerly the Interfaith Hospitality Network of the Main Line. You know that we've had a long and extended relationship with the formerly Interfaith Hospitality Network. We host families here many times. Volunteers provide meals, prepare sleeping places, and spend time with the families during their stay. The mission is to support vulnerable families into being able to achieve sustainable housing. We ask you, if you are not in the room or you would like to donate remotely, to please read the directions on how to make electronic donations, or if you'd like to make a cashless donation. Gotta love Venmo. So I'm going to ask the ushers to please come forward. Your offerings will be gratefully received. In Candles of Community, we share our personal joys and sorrows, believing that we are healed not in isolation, but in community. Marlise is going to light our candles. The first candle, after each candle is lit, I invite you to join me in saying, "We hold you in our hearts." Claudia Gard asks us to light a candle of healing and gratitude. Claudia tells us that Paul suffered a retinal detachment on July 15th, and thanks to the amazing care at Wills Eye Hospital, he had surgery and is now slowly regaining his sight. How thankful we are to have such a wonderful hospital so close. For Paul and Claudia, we hold you in our hearts. We light a candle of celebration for the return of Caroline, Joel, Issy, Betsy, and Toby. Caroline, who's not in the room right now, because I think she's with the kids, has just returned for her second year of her ministerial internship. For Caroline and Joel and their family, we hold you in our hearts. And I invite Bobby and Bill Potstick to please join us and light a candle. They're celebrating their 56th wedding anniversary today. We light a candle of celebration and gratitude for sharing your celebration. Congratulations, happy anniversary. And we light a candle of celebration and gratitude on August 1st. It was the 27th anniversary of our partnership with Dr. Vincent Craig. We're grateful for the gifts of your talent, for the passion, for the beauty of music, and the power to bring us together in a collective effervescence of shared experience. For Vincent and for us, we hold you in our hearts. So after our reflective reading, we're just going to have a moment of pause before the music begins. And the reading was chosen by Libby, by Reverend Smith. Trying to let go of some formality. Okay, we're good, Libby? All right. Good. Okay, and it's from Why Am I an Agnostic by Robert Ingersoll. Let us be honest with ourselves. In the presence of countless mysteries, standing beneath the boundless heaven sown thick with constellations, knowing that each grain of sand, each leaf, each blade of grass asks of every mind the answerless question, knowing that the simplest thing defies solution, feeling that we deal with the superficial and the relative, and that we are forever eluded by the real, the absolute. Let us admit the limitations of our minds, and let us have the courage and candor to say, we do not know. So I ask you to get quiet for a moment. It's not enough time, and it's too much time. I'll invite you out in a moment. for Libby's sermon.
Kind of hate to break that mood with spoken word. But I want to begin by saying how very nice it is to be back at Mainline, to see so many familiar and friendly faces, and to know that there are others out there on Zoom that I'm not seeing. But I also need to acknowledge that I'm just a little bit ambivalent about it for a couple of reasons. I'm not ambivalent about seeing all of you. As I said, it's a joy to connect with you folks over the years, and it always makes preaching here special. One of the great pleasures of being mostly retired is having the luxury of guest preaching, going to different congregations, meeting different groups of UUs all over the area. And when I get to come back for multiple visits over time, then a lovely sense of connection and community develops, and I feel like I'm part of something, and that's very special. And after the past 3.5 years, I do not take a sense of community and connection for granted anymore. I have vivid memories of coming down here during the pandemic and recording preaching to no one but Jay, who tried his best to be a whole congregation back there for me. Sometimes the worship associate would be here too if Chris was recording her bits those days. I'm not sure I ever was clear with you, Jay, just how much those opportunities for connection sustained me during that long, dry pandemic spell, but those were very special days for me. But the energy was just not quite the same as preaching to a room full of people. But now, of course, we've largely found our way back, and here we are. Back to community, back to relationship, back to normal life. And so for some folks, that's been really easy and really joyful. And for some of us, it's been a little harder maybe than we expected or hoped it would be. Which brings me back to my ambivalence, because while it is a genuine, heartfelt pleasure to be here, I admit I am still a little edgy about being indoors in groups of people in an enclosed space for an extended period of time. And I'm exquisitely aware that that is now very much a minority opinion. In our household, we have some immune issues. And so while life is pretty much normal for most people and closer to normal for us than it was before, I am still rocking my N95s every time I go out in public. But increasingly, I am the only person wearing a mask, and I've started to get some looks, some eye rolls. It seems that there are people who are done with the pandemic who think I should be done with the pandemic too. And I find myself feeling defensive, wanting to justify myself, to say to anyone who gives me that look, hey, look, this is not a political statement, okay? This is not a judgment on you. I'm really happy for you that you have the freedom to be where you are. This is about my immune-compromised family members, so please try to understand. But noticing the reactions that I'm getting has helped me realize something about our culture. And the pandemic has really highlighted this, but it did not create it. It's our tendency to pigeonhole one another on the basis of extremely limited information. We are so good at snap judgments. Small symbols immediately become a signal of what side someone is on. Mask or no mask. American flag on the pickup truck. Hate has no home here sign in the front yard. Black Lives Matter lapel pin. Or the one I saw that said, gun rights are women's rights. I'm still trying to figure that one out. But we take one look and we think we know everything we need to know about another person. Now, one of my guilty secrets is that I love reading detective novels and watching mystery series on television. And one of the reasons that I love it so much is that I almost always know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and I know which side to be on. Because one is pretty much obviously right and the other is obviously wrong, and that kind of certainty is really comforting. I want to be confident that I know what I know. I want to believe what I think. But that's fiction. Real life isn't like that. The issues are often much more complicated and more nuanced than maybe we want to acknowledge. And our work is to get underneath the symbols and the code words that seem to tell us so much about each other and look for the deeper truths. Now, I stumbled across an article last fall that lifts up what a deep and urgent need this is in our culture right now, and offers a strategy for how to go about the hard work of going deeper. The article was in the Hedgehog Review. It was by Alan Levinovitz. He's a professor. He's a university professor, but he does not advocate the closed-mind school. He's a professor in the Philosophy and Religion department at James Madison University. And the article first caught my eye because of the title, In Praise of Bewilderment. I thought, finally, someone is affirming my natural state. I have got to read this article. Well, it turned out to be a little more in-depth than that. Levinovitz begins by saying, there is hope for America's ailing soul. It draws on a standard teaching technique familiar to anyone reading these words, bewilderment. And then he goes on to say what he means by that. He describes the way that he leads his students to question all of their assumptions and recognize the complexity of the issues that they're studying. They start out, the first example he uses, his students start out absolutely certain that science and religion are utterly incompatible ways of looking at the world. They might each have value, different kind of value perhaps, but they are, you have to choose. One, you're either religious or you're scientific. It's one or the other, period. His students are certain of this. But he says, when someone is certain, it's very hard to learn. So, he says, I begin with bewilderment. Are you familiar with Gregor Mendel, the 19th century Roman Catholic friar, whose mathematical acumen and love of biology gave us the earliest known laws of genetic heredity? Did you know Sir Isaac Newton wrote much more about religion and astrology, no, not astronomy, astrology, than physics? Maybe you find history dull, then consider Dr. Francis Collins, former director of the National Institutes of Health, leader of the Human Genome Project, and avowed evangelical Christian. He finds, not surprisingly, that his students at first resist this kind of exploration, but he meets their arguments with counter-arguments until they are deep into the complexities of the interplay between science and religion. And he says, eventually, if we're lucky, we achieve bewilderment. Fine, what is the relationship between science and religion? And there, in the space created by uncertainty and ambiguity, learning can begin. That space, he says, is humble, open, flexible. My students discover that I'm right there in it with them. I don't have the answers either. We work together, think things through, and as in any good class, we emerge changed, not validated. I want to repeat just a little of that. In the space created by uncertainty and ambiguity, learning can begin. That space is open, humble, flexible. We emerge changed, not validated. Well, that leads directly to the other reason that I'm ambivalent about being here this morning. Because I'm preaching yet another sermon about something that I think is really, really important, and very rarely do I manage to do it. The hardest thing for me about writing sermons is the way I am constantly brought face to face with this deep chasm between who I am and who I really want to be and think I should be. I'm often not willing to enter that space of ambiguity that Levinovitz describes, where learning can take place. If I'm really honest, I'm more interested in having other people recognize the validity of where I'm coming from, to realize that I'm right. I'm like that professor whose mind is so full of my own opinions and speculations that there's no room in my cup. And as Levinovitz points out, that makes it very hard to learn. So the illustration that Levinovitz used about science and religion was particularly helpful for me because I've wrestled with that. And it led to my choice for this morning's reading. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Robert Ingersoll. He was an American lawyer, writer, and orator in the mid to late 1800s, who was known as the Great Agnostic, and who wrote volumes defending and extolling the agnostic worldview. I discovered him in college, and I devoured his writings. I copied out long passages from them in my journals. I still have a sheaf of typewritten pages that I took from, volumes and volumes from the university library of the blasphemy trials he was involved in. I was deeply moved by his ability to claim the power and mystery and awe of the universe without also claiming religious belief. His views were far more radical in his day, of course, than they are now, or even when I stumbled across them in the early 80s. But I felt so validated by his vehemence. Having been raised a Unitarian Universalist in South Central Pennsylvania, it wasn't always easy. Hearing him say, "Let us have the courage and the candor to say we do not know," was music to a defiant young Unitarian's ears. Now, over time, I came to hear echoes of arrogance in Ingersoll's words. We are the courageous ones. We have the courage and the candor to admit that we do not know. The rest of you are too timid and dishonest to admit it, and you cling instead to your ridiculous belief statements. I do think there's a little bit of an undertone of that in Ingersoll, but maybe he didn't mean it that way. Certainly for me as a young adult, he opened a door that allowed me to claim my commitment to rationalism while also claiming the beauty and mystery of the world around me, to see that those two things could interface, that I didn't have to pick one or the other. In his way, he was a bridge between religion and science for me. But I wanted to use his words for another reason this morning, a cautionary one. And some of you have probably heard me struggle with this issue in other sermons because we tend to keep coming back to the things we find most challenging. I'm often struck by the way we Unitarian Universalists, who put such an emphasis on being willing to admit we don't know when it comes to theology, tend to be extremely sure that we do know when it comes to everything else. We have done it consistently, even within our own movement. In fact, often about theology, we have had huge denominational fights about the right way not to know. The early Unitarians completely ostracized the Transcendentalists when that movement began to emerge because it threatened their orthodoxy. And then we had a long stretch where we embraced the Transcendentalists, but the humanists and the theists were battling over who had the right to be here. You Christians still often feel marginalized, and as a sort of Christian who also has a Mennonite identity, I relate to that. And we do the same thing with social issues in our movement. We dig in our heels not only about the right causes to embrace, but also about the very specific methodology that must be used to do the work of those causes. We don't seem to have much capacity for bewilderment, even among ourselves. We are so sure that we're right. Our cup is too full. Now, Levinovitz starts his article by affirming that bewilderment provides hope for America's ailing soul. That's a big claim. So clearly, he believes that we need to bring this kind of openness and humility into public dialogue of all kinds. He acknowledges that that's hard to do, that it's scary to move into that state of bewilderment, to be less sure that we know what we think we know. But he argues, the resulting worldview is more useful and more beautiful because it genuinely reflects reality. That's why a synonym for bewilderment is wonder, which at least for me is not terrifying, but exhilarating. I like wonder as a synonym for bewilderment. Bewilderment can sound a little bit belittling, but wonder, that's something we all, you use love wonder, right? That's one of our big words. My sister told me years ago that when she comes up against someone, and hear the language I'm using, she comes up against someone, it's very confrontational language, isn't it? Whose attitude is very different from her own. She tries to approach them with an attitude of witness and wonder. Witness, pay attention in a serious way to what the person is saying and thinking. And then wonder, try to imagine where those thoughts and ideas are coming from, why the person feels and thinks the way they do. Now, trying to understand doesn't necessarily mean we wind up agreeing. And Levinovitz is definitely not saying that the goal is for us all to agree with each other. He says clearly, allowing bewilderment to infuse our approach to an issue does not mean we cannot have strong beliefs. Of course, we'll still have strong differences of opinion on all kinds of issues. We still need to take stands on the things that we care passionately about. But, he argues, if we can bring some of that sense of bewilderment into a conversation with someone who disagrees with us. Quote, the conversation turns into a dialogue instead of an argument. We make progress instead of war. Now, Levinovitz is talking about big issues: religion and science, abortion, politics at every level. He sees us as a nation heading very much in the wrong direction. And by that, he doesn't mean to the left or to the right, but to more and more certainty and rigidity on each side of every issue. The absolute divide between left and right. And he argues that if we can buck that trend, if we cultivate bewilderment in ourselves and by our arguments and by our example, we can encourage its cultivation in others. Now, personally, I find this to be a pretty big ask. Many of us have tried to have those conversations across those chasms, and we haven't always felt like we've been met in the middle. It has not always gone well. It's easy to assume that the person on the other side isn't going to meet us in that vulnerable space, and it feels risky to cede any ground to those people and their ideas. And when we feel under threat, then it's easy to dig in our heels and defend our side even more vehemently as the right side. But I just have to ask, how is that working for us, really, if we take a look around? Now, Levinovitz uses the metaphor of spandex to illustrate the way that bewilderment functions in public dialogue. Think about how clothing is more flexible and resilient, able to accommodate different shapes when you add a little bit of spandex. As he says, you can squat without ripping your pants. That's how bewilderment benefits culture. He says the fabric of our society is increasingly inflexible, brittle, and fragile. Our rigid ideologies are ready to crack under the slightest pressure. But this is a democracy, and we can fight against the inertia of tyrannical certainty one person at a time. We can cultivate bewilderment in ourselves, and by our own example, encourage its cultivation in others. We can admit with the relief of honesty that some questions, I love this, some questions are genuinely difficult. We can reject the rigid binaries forced upon us by a sense of crisis. And we can recognize that our resistance to doing so isn't in the service of making progress, but rather a way of protecting ourselves. I want to pause there and repeat that, because our resistance to doing this, to trying to be flexible and open, is not in the service of making progress, but rather a way of protecting ourselves. It's very easy for me to see that when I'm looking at the people I disagree with. Oh, they're operating out of fear. That's self-protection on their part. But I need to turn the mirror around and see how much of my own attitude is also fear and self-protection. Levinovitz then closes by saying, I have hope for our collective soul, which, if we have the courage, can stretch and change instead of tearing itself apart. Well, I would certainly prefer to see our culture, our nation, stretch and change rather than tear ourselves apart. And if it feels too daunting to jump right into this discussion of bewilderment when facing the great chasms in our culture, the good news is there's plenty of room to practice right here. Because in my experience, it's hard enough to cultivate that attitude of witness and wonder, even among the people I'm closest to, the ones I respect and appreciate, even in my own family, where we tend, I know in some families it's really hard because people are in very different places on issues. I've got a really harmonious family, we all think about alike. And even then, my sister and I can come up against these things where we just cannot get each other's point of view. Even in a community like this, we define ourselves by our common values, right? But even here, we contain a wide range of experiences and opinions. whether it's where we are on pandemic precautions, or personal ideology or theology, or a variety of social and political issues. We have plenty of differences among us. And we can be very quick to take sides and judge even each other. If there's any hope of our learning to enter a state of bewilderment with folks who are very different from us, it lies in our learning right here to witness and wonder with one another, to meet differences with curiosity rather than judgment, to pour out at least a little of our certainty and leave a little room in our cup for new understandings and ideas. And you have a fabulous opportunity coming up for that as a new minister comes to join you and you enter into a new era of congregational life. So I'm just incredibly excited to see what happens here and how you all move forward. So I invite you to join me in search of and in praise of bewilderment. Let us at least sometimes have the courage and the candor, as Ingersoll put it, to say, "We do not know," and really mean it. And then maybe we'll begin to learn. I invite you to join in singing hymn number 323, Break Not the Circle. I invite you to be seated so that after our words of benediction, you can remain in your seats and enjoy another piece of music from Dr. Craig. These words of benediction, as we extinguish our chalice, come from the Reverend Barbara Hamilton Holway. Go now in peace. Deeply regard each other. Truly listen to each other. Speak what each of you must speak. Be ready in any moment to disarm your own heart, and always live as if a reign of love had begun. So be it. Blessed be. Amen.